There is something deeply unsettling about the historical record surrounding Mary Read, not because it is sparse, but because it is specific. The court transcripts from her 1720 trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica, name her clearly. The charges name her clearly. The witnesses who testified against her, sailors and merchants whose ships had been boarded at Cutlass Point, described her clearly. And yet the same documents that establish her presence on one of the most notorious pirate vessels in the Caribbean also reveal that nobody aboard that ship, and almost no one she had ever sailed or soldiered with, knew she was a woman until she chose to let them. That is the anomaly. That is what makes
this story something other than a simple pirate tale dressed up in gender-reversal novelty. What we are actually dealing with here is a woman who not only survived inside exclusively male worlds, military regiments, merchant vessels, pirate crews, but who thrived in them, fought in them, and killed in them. Not by softening her edges to fit. By becoming, in every observable way, one of the men around her. The question worth asking is not whether that was remarkable. It obviously was. The question is how, and more precisely, why the deception held, across years, across multiple identities, across multiple careers, in some of the most violent and unforgiving environments of the early
18th century. The world Mary Read was born into offered women almost no structural space to exist independently. The exact year of her birth is uncertain. Historians place it somewhere in the 1690s, in England, but the circumstances around her earliest years are recorded with unusual candor, likely because they became part of the courtroom testimony and later the published accounts that followed her trial. Her mother had been married to a sailor who went to sea and did not return. When the sailor's mother, Mary's paternal grandmother, had been providing financial support to the family, that support was conditional on the existence of a legitimate male heir. When Mary's older brother died, her mother made a calculated decision. She dressed her infant daughter as a boy and presented the child to the grandmother as him. The deception worked. The money continued. What is striking about this detail is not simply that her mother used it as a survival mechanism. That part is not uncommon in historical accounts of impoverished widows navigating inheritance systems designed to exclude them. What is striking is that Mary Read grew up inside the disguise. She did not adopt it as an adult out of desperation or opportunity. It was the first language she was taught. Before she understood what disguise meant, she was already living one. Her entire childhood identity was built on a fiction that her mother had constructed for economic reasons, and by the time she was old enough to understand that fiction, it had already become the shape of how she moved through the world. The masquerade outlasted its original financial purpose. When the grandmother died and the money stopped, Mary did not revert. She continued to present herself as male, and somewhere in her teenage years she used that presentation to enter employment as a footbar, a male servant, in a wealthy household. This was not an act of confusion or compulsion. It was a practical calculation, the same kind her mother had made before her. A young woman without family money, without a husband, and without a trade had almost no legal avenue to earn independent wages in early 18th century England. A young man, even a poor one, had several. Mary Read understood the arithmetic of that distinction, and she made her choice accordingly. From domestic service, the record suggests she moved into something considerably more dangerous. The specific sequence is difficult to reconstruct precisely, but by the early 1700s she had enlisted, as a man, in the British military. First in a foot regiment, then aboard a man-of-war. Military historians who have examined this period note that physical examinations for new recruits were perfunctory at best, and that unit cohesion in line regiments depended far more on demonstrated behavior, endurance, obedience, nerve under fire, than on documentation. Mary Read, by all accounts, had no difficulty meeting those standards. She drilled, she marched, she slept in barracks. If she had any fear during those years, the historical record does not show it. And here the first major question opens. The military career, the service aboard ships, the eventual crossing into piracy, these represent a sustained performance across years and institutions, maintained under conditions of profound physical proximity. Men in 18th century military service shared sleeping quarters, ate from common mess, stripped and bathed with the practical indifference of people who had no privacy and expected none. The deception could not have relied on darkness and distance. It required something more active, more deliberate, a complete inhabiting of the role, a fluency in male behavior so total that it generated no doubt worth acting on. Whatever Mary Read understood about how men occupied space, how they spoke, how they carried their bodies in the presence of other men, she had apparently absorbed it down to the level of reflex. That knowledge, and what it cost her to maintain it, is the real architecture of this story. And before we can understand what happened on the ship of John Rackham in 1720, we have to understand how she built it. The war that pulled Mary Read into its machinery was the War of the Spanish Succession, one of the defining conflicts of the early 18th century, a sprawling European power struggle that sent armies across the Low Countries and left entire generations of men ground down in siege lines and muddy field engagements. She had enlisted in a British foot regiment, and the regiment was deployed to Flanders. The campaign there was brutal in the way that early modern European warfare was always brutal: slow advances, entrenched positions, artillery, dysentery, and the specific grinding misery of fighting over territory that changed hands repeatedly without ever quite resolving the underlying contest. In that environment, Mary Read fought. The verb is not used loosely. Contemporary accounts, drawing on testimony from people who knew her during this period, describe her as a capable soldier, not as a curiosity or an anomaly, but simply as a fighting man in a regiment doing what fighting men in that war were expected to do. There is no record of her hesitating, no record of her being identified, no record of anything other than ordinary military competence. She was, by any external measure, indistinguishable from the men around her. It was also in Flanders that the first crack appeared in the architecture of her solitary double life. She fell in love with a Flemish soldier in her regiment. The records do not preserve his name with certainty, but the shape of what happened is documented through the later accounts compiled after her trial. She revealed herself to him. Privately, carefully, at significant personal risk, because the revelation, if it spread, could have meant court-martial, imprisonment, or worse. He did not expose her. Instead, they married. Quietly, legally, at the end of the war, once the regiment was disbanded and the immediate danger of discovery inside the military structure had passed. The marriage was brief. The Flemish soldier died, the accounts say from illness, though the exact circumstances are vague, and Mary Read was widowed within a short time of the war's end. She had briefly stepped sideways into a conventional life: female identity, legal marriage, a small inn she and her husband had opened in Breda with what money they had. The inn failed after his death. The peace that followed the war had collapsed the military economy that had supported establishments catering to soldiers and officers. She was alone again, without income, without a husband's legal protection over her property and person, and without any structural pathway forward that the society she lived in was willing to provide her. She made the same calculation she had always made. She put the male clothing back on. This time she signed on to a merchant vessel heading for the West Indies. The Caribbean in the early 18th century was not simply a geographic destination, it was a specific kind of world, operating according to its own logic. The major European powers had spent the previous century carving it into colonial territories, building plantation economies on enslaved labor, and establishing trade routes that moved extraordinary volumes of sugar, tobacco, indigo, and silver back toward Europe. Those routes made certain people extraordinarily wealthy. They also made the sea lanes between islands into one of the most contested and dangerous stretches of water on Earth, because wherever wealth moved in concentrated, predictable patterns, predators gathered to intercept it. The predators, by the second decade of the 18th century, had become a significant geopolitical problem. The period historians now call the Golden Age of Piracy was not a romantic accident. It was the direct product of specific structural conditions. The end of the War of the Spanish Succession in 1713 had flooded the Atlantic world with unemployed sailors and privateers, men who had spent years raiding enemy shipping under legal commissions, and who now found those commissions revoked and no legitimate employment waiting for them. The skills they possessed, navigation, weapons handling, shipboard combat, the ability to operate for months in open water without resupply, had exactly one civilian market. Piracy offered wages, a share of prizes, and a flat organizational structure that stood in stark contrast to the brutal hierarchy of the Royal Navy. For thousands of men without alternatives, it was the most rational option available. It was into this world that Mary Read's merchant vessel sailed, and it was in this world that the merchant vessel was taken. The ship was seized by pirates operating out of New Providence in the Bahamas, and Mary Read, presenting as a male sailor, was among those given the standard pirate offer: join the crew or be put off in a longboat. She joined. Whether this was coerced or chosen is a question the record cannot fully answer, but what the record is clear about is what happened next. She did not merely endure the transition. She adapted to it with the same competence she had brought to every previous environment. New Providence, under the nominal oversight of Governor Woodes Rogers, was the uneasy center of Caribbean piracy's final years. Rogers had arrived in 1718 with a royal pardon in one hand and a mandate to end piracy in the other, and his partial success had scattered many crews from their Bahamian base without fully destroying their networks. The sea lanes remained dangerous. Enforcement was inconsistent and underfunded. For a crew willing to operate quickly and stay mobile, the Caribbean still offered substantial opportunity, particularly against the smaller inter-island traders that lacked the armament to resist a determined boarding party. Mary Read was now operating inside that world, and the identity she had maintained for years, the male sailor, competent and unremarkable, held as solidly aboard a pirate vessel as it had in a Flemish regiment. But something was shifting. The conditions of pirate life, specifically the enforced intimacy of a small ship and the absence of the rigid formal structures that had governed military service, were creating new pressures. And sometime in this period, she encountered a man on the crew who interested her, a young sailor she eventually revealed herself to, and with whom, by her own later account, she formed a genuine attachment. That attachment would nearly get him killed. And the way she handled the threat against him is one of the few moments in Mary Read's story where the mask slips completely, where what emerges is not the constructed identity, not the soldier or the sailor or the pirate, but something more unguarded and considerably more dangerous. John Rackham was not the most feared pirate in the Caribbean. He was not the wealthiest, not the most strategically gifted, and not the most brutal. What he was, in the years between 1718 and 1720, was persistently active, raiding small vessels along the Jamaican coast and through the Bahama Channel with enough regularity to attract the attention of colonial authorities who had been assured, repeatedly, that the piracy problem was under control. He had a small sloop, a crew of limited size, and an appetite for prizes that consistently outweighed his caution. History remembers him primarily because of the two women aboard his ship. He would likely have preferred a different kind of fame. Anne Bonny had come to Rackham through scandal. She was the wife of a Bahamian sailor named James Bonny, a marriage that had already fractured by the time she encountered Rackham in the taverns of New Providence. The relationship between Bonny and Rackham became an open secret in the small, claustrophobic social world of the Bahamian settlement, and when the situation became untenable, Governor Rogers had made clear that he viewed Anne Bonny's conduct as a public disorder. She left with Rackham aboard his sloop. She was, by multiple accounts, a willing and capable participant in the crew's activities. She was also, unlike Mary Read, known to be a woman by at least some members of the crew. From the beginning, Mary Read arrived on Rackham's vessel through the mechanism that had brought her into piracy in the first place. Her ship was taken, and she transferred crews. When she came aboard, she came as she always came, as a man. The crew accepted her without question. Rackham accepted her without question. And for a period, the two women occupied the same small ship without the general crew apparently understanding that there were two women aboard rather than one. The dynamic between Mary Read and Anne Bonny has attracted considerable historical speculation, most of it unhelpfully focused on whether the relationship between them contained romantic dimensions. What the court testimony actually documents is more interesting and more pragmatic than that. Anne Bonny, knowing what she knew about navigating male spaces while female, recognized something in Mary Read that the male crew did not. She approached her. The records suggest Bonny initially made advances toward what she understood to be a young and unusually attractive male sailor, and that Mary Read, understanding the problem this created, revealed her identity privately to Bonny to defuse it. From that point, they appear to have functioned as something close to confederates, each aware of the other's situation in a way no one else on the ship was. This is the point in the narrative where the male disguise becomes complicated in a new way. Mary Read had maintained her identity through institutional contexts, regiments, merchant vessels, pirate crews, where the operative question was whether she could perform the required functions. She could, and she did, and that was sufficient. But Rackham's ship was smaller, more intimate, and more socially volatile than those earlier environments. The crew was not a regiment operating under military discipline. It was a loose collective of men bound together by shared criminality and the expectation of shared profit, and the social dynamics aboard such a vessel were accordingly more fluid, more personal, and considerably more dangerous. It was in this environment that the incident with the young sailor occurred. Mary Read had formed an attachment to a man aboard the crew. His name is not preserved with certainty in the surviving records, and when a dispute arose between him and another, more experienced pirate, the older man challenged him to a duel. The calculus was straightforward and brutal. The challenger was a seasoned fighter, and the young sailor was almost certainly going to be killed. Mary Read understood this. Her response was the kind that makes historians pause and reconsider whatever frame they have been using. She picked a fight with the challenger herself. Deliberately, calculably, she engineered a quarrel that superseded the original dispute, and because the code that governed pirate dueling required that her challenge be addressed before the earlier one, she faced the experienced fighter first. They went ashore, as the custom dictated, with pistols and cutlasses. Mary Red fought him and killed him. The young sailor survived because she had removed the threat before it could reach him. Absorbed the full architecture of that decision. She could not reveal her relationship with the young sailor without revealing herself. She could not appeal to the crew's protection without exposing the very identity she had spent her entire life maintaining. The only option available to her that preserved both the man she cared for and the life she had constructed was to take the danger into her own hands and eliminate it directly. Which she did. With enough skill and sufficient violence that the matter was resolved completely. The witnesses who later described this incident at the trial in Spanish Town did not frame it as heroism or as monstrous. They described it with the flat effect of people recounting something they had seen and processed and filed away. One of the crew dealt with a problem in the way crew members dealt with problems. The fact that the crew member turned out to be a woman was the shock. The killing itself, apparently, was not. This detail is worth holding. Because it tells us something specific about how completely Mary Read had inhabited the world she moved through. She had not survived in these spaces by being exceptional in ways that drew attention. She had survived by being ordinary in ways that made her invisible. The violence was not performed for an audience. It was functional, targeted, and it worked. That is the signature of someone who had learned not to be noticed even while doing things that should have been noticeable. By late 1720, the net was tightening. Governor Rogers had dispatched a sloop under Captain Jonathan Barnett with specific orders to bring in Rackham's crew. The operation was not complicated. Rackham's vessel was located near the western coast of Jamaica on the night of October 22, and the crew was found in a condition that the subsequent trial testimony described with considerable contempt. They had been drinking. Most of them, when Barnett's men came aboard, were below decks and effectively incapacitated. The resistance offered to the boarding party was minimal. Most of the resistance, the witnesses agreed, came from two people. The accounts from the trial are explicit on this point. While the majority of the crew retreated below or failed to mount any meaningful defense, Mary Read and Anne Bonny remained on deck and fought. Mary Read, by at least one account, was so enraged by the failure of the men around her that she fired her pistol down the hatch at her own crewmates. Whether from fury at their cowardice or as a tactical attempt to drive them back up to fight is unclear, but the image is striking regardless. Two women, on the deck of a captured sloop in the Jamaican dock, continuing to resist after the men they had sailed with had already surrendered. It was not enough. The ship was taken. The crew was transported to Spanish Town. And the trial that followed would force into public record the identity that Mary Read had spent her entire life keeping private. The court that convened in Spanish Town, Jamaica, in November 1720 was not designed for ambiguity. Vice Admiralty courts operating under the 1700 Act for the more effectual suppression of piracy were summary proceedings, no jury, a panel of commissioners drawn from colonial officials and naval officers, and a mandate that moved efficiently from charges to verdict to sentence. The legal architecture existed specifically to remove the delays and complications of ordinary criminal courts, because the colonial authorities had decided that piracy was an existential threat to Atlantic commerce and needed to be answered with institutional speed. Rackham's crew was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang within days of their capture. The process was not designed to linger. What it was not designed for was Mary Red or Anne Bonny. The revelation of their identities, confirmed through examination, documented in the court record, and immediately circulating through the tight social networks of Jamaican colonial society, created a problem that the legal framework had no prepared category for. The act under which they were tried made no gender distinctions. Piracy was piracy. The death penalty applied equally. And the court, after deliberating on what to do with two convicted female pirates, arrived at a solution that was less a legal innovation than a biological deferral. Both women pleaded their bellies. They were pregnant. English law, and its colonial extensions, prohibited the execution of a pregnant woman until after the child was delivered. The court accepted both pleas, confirmed the pregnancies through examination, and issued the standard stay of execution. Anne Bonny survived. She disappears from the historical record after her reprieve. Some accounts suggest she was eventually released, possibly through the intervention of her father, a wealthy Carolina planter with the social capital to navigate colonial legal systems in ways his daughter could not. The records do not confirm her death in custody. Mary Read's outcome was different. She died in prison in 1721. The cause recorded is fever, the generic term that covered a range of tropical diseases that moved through Jamaican jails with the efficiency of things that thrive in heat and confinement. Whether the pregnancy she had claimed contributed to her physical deterioration, or whether she was already weakened before her arrest, the records cannot say with precision. What they establish is the endpoint. She had survived military campaigns in Flanders, years aboard merchant vessels and pirate ships, a formal trial for capital offenses, and the complete public unmasking of an identity she had spent her entire life constructing, and then she died of a fever in a Jamaican prison, months short of whatever the court had been deliberating about doing with her next. The anticlimactic nature of that ending is itself historically significant. There was no gallows scene. No final speech. No dramatic last act that the pamphleteers and broadsheet writers who immediately began processing her story could use as a clean narrative terminus. She simply became ill and died, in the way that enormous numbers of people in that world died, unremarkably, in confinement, at the mercy of biological forces that respected neither notoriety nor survival instinct. The story did not die with her. Within 3 years of the trial, a publisher named Charles Johnson, almost certainly a pseudonym, and one that has generated substantial scholarly debate about the actual authorship, produced a volume titled A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. The book became one of the most widely read publications of the early 18th century. It contained a chapter on Mary Read. It contained a chapter on Anne Bonny. And it transformed what had been a colonial legal proceeding into something that resonated across the Atlantic reading public with an intensity that the court records alone never could have generated. Johnson's account was not straight history. It was history processed through the conventions of popular narrative, dramatized, moralized in places, and structured to deliver the kind of satisfying arc that readers of early 18th century popular literature expected. Some of the specific details he includes about Mary Read's childhood and military service cannot be independently verified and may have been elaborated or invented to fill gaps in his source material. Historians have debated which elements of his account are reliable for 3 centuries. But the core facts, the disguise, the military service, the Flemish marriage, the Caribbean piracy, the trial, the death, are consistent with the documentary record that exists independently of Johnson's book, and his account has been taken seriously as at least partially grounded in genuine sources, possibly including interviews with people who were present at the trial. What Johnson's book did, regardless of its factual precision, was establish the terms in which Mary Read would be understood for the next 300 years. He framed her story as one of natural masculine virtue trapped in a female body, a framing that tells us considerably more about the ideological assumptions of 1724 than it does about Mary Read herself, but that proved remarkably durable. The idea that her exceptional behavior required a biological or metaphysical explanation, that she must have been, in some essential sense, more man than woman, became the dominant interpretive lens through which her life was processed, because it was the only lens the early 18th century possessed that could make her comprehensible without destabilizing the gender categories the society depended on. That interpretive distortion is worth naming clearly. What Mary Read actually demonstrated, across the full arc of her documented life, was not that she possessed some masculine essence that transcended her female body. What she demonstrated was that the qualities her world assigned exclusively to men, physical courage, combat competence, navigational skill, endurance, the capacity for violence when violence was necessary, were not in fact exclusive to men. They were simply qualities. She had them. She deployed them. The fact that her society could not process this without reaching for the explanation that she must have been secretly male in some meaningful sense is a failure of her society's imagination, not a description of her reality. The legal system that tried her did not know what to do with her either, though for different reasons. The Vice Admiralty Court had a category for pirates. It did not have a category for a woman who had spent decades successfully inhabiting male institutional spaces, fought in multiple military and naval engagements, killed at least one man in single combat by documented account, and arrived at the dock in Spanish Town having lived a life that the court's entire conceptual framework was designed to make impossible. The pregnancy plea bought time. The fever resolved the problem before the time ran out. History, in this as in many things, was saved from having to arrive at a coherent conclusion. What remains, stripped of Johnson's framing and the subsequent centuries of romanticization, is something more austere and more interesting than the legend. Mary Read was not a rebel in the ideological sense. There is no evidence she sat in a Flemish barracks or on the deck of a Caribbean sloop composing philosophical arguments about gender and freedom. She was a pragmatist operating inside severe constraints with the tools available. To her, making rational calculations about survival in a world that had provided her almost no legitimate options. The disguise was not a statement. It was a solution. The military service was not a manifesto. It was employment. The piracy was not liberation. It was the logical endpoint of a sequence of decisions that each made sense given the conditions that preceded it. But pragmatism, sustained across an entire lifetime, inside environments specifically designed to make her existence impossible, and maintained with enough skill and discipline that it was only ever broken on her own terms, that is not a small thing. The woman who was dressed as a boy before she could understand what dressing meant, who fought in a European land war, who killed a man to protect someone she loved, who stood on the deck of a captured sloop and kept fighting after the men around her had already given up, that woman was not performing anything. She was simply doing what she had always done. Occupying the space the world refused to give her by taking it, holding it, and never once, in any environment that mattered, letting anyone take it back. The fever in the Jamaican prison took what no court, no regiment, no boarding party, and no challenger with a cutlass had managed to take before it. And even then, the record survived. Her name is in the trial documents. Her face, or what Johnson's engraver imagined her face to be, is in the 1724 book. The story is still being told. That is not nothing. For a woman who spent her life being invisible, it is, in fact, everything.